About our groundwater project and where we're currently at. The only thing that water geeks like more than actually doing projects is standing up and talking about them and sharing them. So thank you for giving us our excitement and validation tonight. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then we'll pass it off to the project team. But before we start, I do want to introduce, I have two of my board members present with me tonight from Olevenheim, Director Marco San Antonio up front, and then Director Neil Myers over on the side. And I also need to point out Mr. Mike Hogan from Santa Fe Irrigation District, also a director at Santa Fe, long-standing partnership between our two agencies. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I do have members of the project team. I think I'm going to wait and let each speaker subsequently introduce the next speaker in order to save time. But we do have about 6 different individuals who will be available tonight, a couple presenting to answer any questions that you have. Can I do, I don't do next slide, but I just go ahead and do this. So tonight I'm going to give you a brief intro about what Olevenheim is. It'll be super fast. Then Joey Randall, our Assistant General Manager and the Project Manager for this project, is going to talk about the background, kind of how we got here and what we've done. Then we're going to talk about the hydrogeologic update. One of the most important things in a groundwater project is their water, right? And then the next most important thing is the economic analysis. Is this financially viable? And obviously, as we get more refined information, we refined both of those analyses, and that moves us along towards the potential of a project. And then we'll talk about the next steps, and we would love to take any questions, even while we're presenting. Don't wait. We like the interactive. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. So Olevenheim, that's our map over on the right-hand side. We're a public agency. We do potable water, wastewater, recycled water, hydroelectric, and parks and rec. We're pretty much a city without the streets is kind of the one thing that we are not responsible for. And we are responsible for that within about 48 square miles in North San Diego County. And we cover a lot of territory. You can see the 5 to the 15. We do have about 87,000 customers. We're about 90% built out. A lot of that is small infill. We don't have very many other major projects. 466 miles of potable pipeline, about 67 miles of recycled. We're super excited about our recycled. In the last 15 years, we've converted 15% of our demand to recycled water. 17 reservoirs, and we do about 18 million gallons a day of potable water delivery. So the reason why we started looking at this with our board back in 2008, I like to say this, but California has 3 seasons. It's fire, flood, and drought. And they perpetually seem to cycle, right? If you're not in one, you're in the other. And droughts are cyclical, and they keep coming back to us. And OMWD, like almost every other agency in the county, is primarily reliant on imported water supply. Imported from Northern California on the State Water Project, imported on the Colorado River. And not only are those supplies becoming increasingly expensive, they're becoming increasingly vulnerable. And if you listen to the news at all, the Colorado River, while we may have a couple-year reprieve right now where everyone has agreed to cuts, they still have to take a look at the allocations on the Colorado River 2 years from now, and they have underestimated the evaporation on the lower Colorado to the tune of 700,000 acre feet. To give you a perspective on that, San Diego County is supposed to use about 360,000 acre feet of water this year. And so the Colorado has to somehow come up with, just above and beyond climate change, the fact that they've had the wrong formula for the last 40 years on the Colorado. And so this makes local supplies a lot more viable for local agencies. And so our board told us back in 2008, try to find a way that 1/3 of your supply is local supply. And so we did fantastic so far on the recycled. I talked about 15%. We're looking to continue to move on and look at other alternatives. This is one of the alternatives, this groundwater brackish project that we're looking at. We also just became a partner with Encina and their One Water. So we are looking at many alternatives, but this one we have spent a lot of time and energy on. Groundwater, drought, resilient, local supply. One of the things, if anyone was here in the 90s, you were looking at, you want to build local supply treatment capacity in the county because you want to have it in the county in the event of an earthquake. Likewise, local supply does the same thing. The board asked us to be cost competitive. At the time in 08, they asked us to be cost competitive with desal, the Carlsbad desal plant. I think we probably have that covered because unfortunately that has become very expensive. But now the question isn't be cost competitive with the desal, it's be cost competitive with if you don't do this project. If you don't do this project, what do the rates look like? And then our board did definitely like the local control, so that's how we started down this road. And just to point out, OMWD is one of 7 San Diego water agencies that currently doesn't have local water, potable water supplies. And so that we want to kind of make sure that we have those bases covered as things change in San Diego County. So that's the why of why we're here. So now we're going to talk about the project background, and Joey Randall, our assistant GM and the project manager for this project, is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Kim. All right, I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd. I'm gonna try to conscientiously bring you up to where we are today, but I'd be remiss to not give you kind of that project background. Kim kind of gave you the why, and being at the end of the pipe here in Southern California, we're always looking at diversifying our supply. So this is definitely one of the tools in the toolbox that we'll be looking to take advantage of. So Kim mentioned 2008, so we were talking about, that was when the Carlsbad desalination facility was coming online. With Kim's leadership and our board's direction, we were one of the original desal partners. So it was actually started with retail agencies that was then kind of handed to the County Water Authority to work out the final details when that local supply was brought online. So our board said, wow, that's expensive. Do we want to build a direct connection, or should we pursue our alternative supplies, such as the 2 groundwater basins that exist within OMWD's service area? Looking at those costs and looking at the potential escalation there, the board decided, okay, if you can be cost competitive or beat seawater desalination, then keep looking at these groundwater basins. So we initiated that with an opportunities and constraints analysis that actually started in the San Dieguito Groundwater Basin, and we selected that because there was fewer pumpers, obviously a pristine lagoon over the top of it, some environmental concerns, but from a groundwater rights perspective, it may be a smoother or more efficient project. We actually did drilled a 1,000-foot, 1,100-foot test well with the United States Geological Society, and had a partnership there. We actually had some federal funds brought into the project. We completed that. That project was potentially feasible, but it was very deep. So with energy prices kind of skyrocketing at the time and moving up as they have, to pump water from 1,100 feet is obviously very expensive. So we said, well, it looks good, there's opportunities there, but we should look at this other basin, the San Dieguito Groundwater Basin, to vet out which one is going to be the better option. So we moved down to San Dieguito upon completion of the feasibility study in San Alejo. In 2014, we completed that study with the Department of Water Resources, and like I say, began to focus our efforts in the San Dieguito Basin, which I'll tell you more about. This is kind of a broad timeline, and then I'll give you another timeline of where we think we're going. So this is kind of where we've been. You can see that opportunities and constraints analysis. You can see when we moved into the San Dieguito Valley, 2014 through 2017. We actually constructed a test well I'm going to tell you a little bit about. We did a long-term pump test. We continue to update our groundwater model. We're back 30 years now, I believe, on our historical data as far as informing our groundwater model. The more data, the better. And then now we're looking for potential partnership. We're looking hard at the economics of the project and project delivery. And that's where we stand today. So this is our study area, and I was gonna, I don't want to start pressing buttons, I was gonna point out where we are, but you can kind of see we follow you can see the river there, and we're kind of over here on the right-hand side of the screen. We're looking right here, it's called the Suna Basin is another name for this San Diego Valley Groundwater Basin. So in 2017, we we received grant funding from the Department of Water Resources, and we initiated a feasibility study. So that's kind of a paper study that looks at, historical well logs, who's using the basin. We looked at who's existing pumpers. We looked at well permits from the county to try to inform, okay, where do we go with this? What does it look like? We wanted to examine the amount of groundwater available. We wanted to assess that water quality. It is a salty basin, as most coastal aquifers are. We evaluated treatment options. We have some schematics of what that might look like if you're interested afterwards. We wanted to develop a conceptual facility planning. What would this look like? Is it 5 acres? Is it 1 acre? What does it look like? We wanted to develop a cost estimate and then compare that cost estimate to other options or other available options, namely purchasing water from the San Diego County Water Authority, our wholesaler, or desalination, seawater desalination, or other opportunities for local supply. So that 2000 feasibility had some really interesting findings and very positive. The project was feasible and sustainable at 1 MGD and possibly more. And again, we've continued to refine that, but this is what we found in 2017. We do believe that it was cost competitive with imported water and actually less than that of desalinated seawater, even at this time in 2017. The North Valley well field, you can see the, I call this the stick of gum or the blob of gum map. You can see kind of the skin-colored blob in the middle of the screen there. That's kind of where we're honing in as far as that's the north well field. We wanted to make sure that we could meet and exceed all state and federal drinking water standards. So there's lots of regulatory oversight on projects like this, especially on potable water. So we needed to make sure, hey, we want to build this well the right way with sanitary seals, et cetera, et cetera. When we also, one of the big constraints with this project is our brine disposal. I was talking to one of the members in the audience who has some experience with the well water, and yeah, it's salty. It's anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 parts per million. That's enough to kill grass on its own. And so we needed to figure out a way, hey, how could we remove that brine or that salt, and where could we put it? So we needed to identify that opportunity, and that was identified. Our preferred alternative was to actually build a long pipeline and dispose of it through the ocean outfall at the San Dieguito Joint Powers Authority. So that's what we found with our feasibility study. And then the smart folks, many of you who are in the audience today, said, well, okay, that's the paper study, Joey. Now we need to prove it out. So we need to drill a well. We need to figure out, what that well can produce. And what that water quality looks like. So there again, we kind of wrote up a grant, went to the state, and ended up with over $500,000 of grant funding to help us out with this pilot test well. So we installed that test well. We found a partner. We kind of put a all points bulletin out to the community. Hey, anybody looking to partner? Anybody want to know what's going on with the groundwater basin? We found some takers and ended up partnering with Surf Cup. The soccer fields there, the former polo fields, and they had a couple wells on their property, and they were interested in partnering if they could use the water that we produce, and that was a perfect marriage because we had to dispose of the water that we produce. So even though it comes out of that groundwater basin, we can't just put it right back in there without treating it, and that's a regulatory standard. So don't ask me why, but that's the rule. So we were able to partner with Surf Cup and install this well. It's no more than a couple hundred feet down. It's an 18-inch well. We built it to all the standards that we, wanted to make sure that if we ever wanted to turn this into a production well, that we would have that potential. And so we wanted to, not lose those sunk costs. So we built that to a DDW standard, Division of Drinking Water standard. And so yeah, we pumped this for a year. We pumped that aquifer for a year. And what we did, we actually utilized the Surf Cup irrigation pond. They were going through some renovations at the time, so they actually had an abandoned irrigation main line that we were able to use to bring that to a bioswell, a turf grass kind of swell that actually discharged into the lagoon. So that's under the tidal influence. So that's how we were able to get that permit. That elevation at that point was consistent with the lagoon, so that was actually under the tidal influence, and therefore that's how we were able to permit that. We found that there was minor impacts to the storage, to the basin storage. Some of the findings, I don't want to steal Mr. McFarland's thunder, but we were thinking, that this would actually use about 1% of the basin storage, so a very small amount of what's actually available in the basin. And the impacts to local wells, you always are concerned about being a good neighbor. So we don't want to drill a well here and impact any of the golf courses or any of the pumpers in the area. And we found that through that testing of the pilot test well and the monitoring, that those impacts are negligible. So there could be some of the closer wells, there could be some minor impacts, but through adjusting of their pump height or some other arrangement with the district, that we can mitigate those pretty easily. So no impact, but a mitigable impact. I said that right. So consistent, or kind of right along the heels of that one-year pump test, we decided, wow, now we need to identify these fatal flaws. Before we spend any more money, we need to understand, what are the regulatory constraints here, down into the details. What are the environmental constraints here? Are we barking up the wrong tree? So we, again, got with that project team, kind of got the smart people, circled the wagons, and did a deep dive on what the environmental constraints would be. And we've identified that it's a clear path forward. I'm not saying it's easy. This will be a full-blown EIR if a project were to move forward. An environmental impact report has community input, community meetings. It's a very open process. It's governed by the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. But there's a clear path forward. So again, not that it's easy, but there's no fatal flaw. It's a matter of time and dedication that we can figure out how to make sure that this doesn't have that negative impact on the environment. We also wanted to look at that regulatory strategy, because developing a water supply to a drinking water standard is highly regulated. So again, that Division of Drinking Water, we engaged them early and often. As a matter of fact, all of the regulators, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, engaged with those regulators, got that input from them, wanted to best inform the decisions or any decision that we could at that time. And again, we found there is a clear path forward. So again, not easy, but with the proper well development, with the proper well installation, with the proper treatment and the proper iron and manganese removal, brine disposal, that there is a clear path forward from a regulatory standpoint as well. Okay, so once we got through that hurdle and kind of keep checking the boxes, we said, well, what about the economics? Does this make sense? It's not a whole lot of water. Is this really going to pan out from a dollars and cents perspective? So again, got with the smart folks, project team kind of huddled, and we came up with an opportunity that again, Don's going to get into a little more detail with, but to identify, okay, what are the non-cost factors? So it improves local supply reliability, improves local control. It's beneficially using a natural resource in the area that's not currently being used. Then we got into cost factors. So with reasonable assumptions, this project looks good. So when we compare it to the cost of imported water, so again, no longer are we comparing to seawater desal, because that cost kind of took off there for a minute. We're comparing just against the cost that we buy treated water from the San Diego County Water Authority. And so that no project alternative is basically not doing the project, not building this project. So again, I don't want to steal Don's thunder, but over the 30-year life of a project, this is looking very economically advantageous. And that would lead us to our next, our non-cost and our cost finding support, advancing the project, first through planning and agency coordination. And we continued that process with our project partners. So this is just a highlight of the funding. It's kind of a very interesting project for grantors, the state, feds, and we have a host of both local from the Metropolitan Water District, $175,000 you can see there, all the way to state and federal funding from the United States Bureau of Reclamation. We're also continuing to look at funding opportunities, so both local, federal, and state. We have a couple of irons in the fire currently that are looking really good. Grant funding is going to be key to the overall economics of this project. We're also exploring our potential partnerships. So, rarely does a project get built alone these days. We've got some great partners with our neighboring water agencies, got some community services districts in and around the area. There's some environmental groups that are very kind of forward thinking with the way that we can develop water supply, and also private entities and from a water supply perspective, HOAs, private well owners, etc. We've also continued to try to have these conversations with the community. So here we are today. This is kind of a list. Obviously, OMWD board meetings are public meetings as well. We've had a series of those workshops, including special meetings, a couple of special meetings over the years with the board. You can see the nice list there. There's about 10 or a dozen or so that we've, just trying to keep those touch points, make sure we're understanding where the community is coming from, and address those concerns as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Don McFarland, DLM Engineering. He's our lead on, he kind of corrals a lot of the consultants in the project team, and has a ton of experience, over 40 years experience in the water industry. I call him the Don Father because he is a mentor of mine in water and in life. So, you ready to go, Don?
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to talk about some of the things we've done the last year and just keep it pretty brief, but chime in and ask questions anytime you want. Hydrogeologic update, so that's basically groundwater, okay? Anything to do with groundwater. Brian Villalobos is here. He's our lead consultant on hydrogeologic work, and any of those tough questions, he's here to answer them. So what we did last year was we continued the water level monitoring. I'll get into a little detail on that. We did studies and investigations of the geology in the groundwater basin, really aimed at where's the best place to put production wells. That was all focused on that. Just in the last month or so, we completed some geophysical work, which we'll get into a little bit, explain what that is. It really helped us understand the basin. Maybe, one of the most important things is to estimate return flow. And so that's not a common term that you're familiar with. There's 4 agencies that supply water in the basin. Their customers irrigate, and some of that water goes past the root zone and goes back in and recharges the groundwater basin. And California state law has proved out that those agencies have the right to recover that water. And as long as they don't impact the neighbors, that becomes a source of supply for those 4 agencies. And it'll be, I think, an important portion of our supply moving forward with the project. This map, all the dots are wells that we monitor, or Lehman monitors in the valley. Virtually everyone that we talk to was cooperative about letting us monitor their wells. Most of them, all of them have water level monitors, some have water quality monitors also, some of them have flow monitors too. So really good network. We use this during the 1-year pump test so we can see what happened throughout the basin as we pumped. And this data is all archived with the County of San Diego. So it's available to the public and it's there forever to use. And we'll use it with our modeling efforts going forward. Geophysical program. So geophysics in basic terms allows us to look at the substrata below the ground surface without drilling holes and digging holes and doing that. It's a couple of different techniques which we'll go into in detail if you'd like to know more about them. But one is seismic reflection, the other one is sting electrical resistivity tomography. It's a tough one to say. That map that's up there, you can just barely see. There's a series of yellow lines, some going across the page and some going up and down. So basically what we did was we applied those techniques along those lines, and that would tell us what was underneath. So how much sand, how much gravel, is there a clay layer there, where's the bedrock? And that information was very useful. Like I said, Geoscience just finished that and just interpreted it and put it into a form that we can all use. So we know a lot more about this part of the basin than we did before. That was a big accomplishment last year. This is a map from the 2017 feasibility study. The circle represents what we thought was a good area to drill production wells, or as Joey mentioned, the chewing gum over there on that slide. Kind of this area here is the good area to drill wells, most productive. That hasn't changed. It's maybe gotten a little bit bigger, but we know a lot more about the geology now, so we're in a lot better place than we were a year ago. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about water balance and return flow. If you've been to one of our presentations before, you've seen this. We call it the bathtub graph. The yellow lines, yellow arrows represent water that's leaving the basin. So pumpers, evapotranspiration, for surface flow to the ocean, that's all water that's going out. The blue is water that's coming in, and that can be rainfall, recharge, it can be ponds that recharge the basin. One of the real key factors is the return flow that I mentioned earlier. So in this past year, Geoscience did a major update on the return flow estimate. We actually got water meter records from Lebanon, Santa Fe, City of Del Mar, used actual water records, water that people were using in the basin. And then we applied a methodology that's very proven. We can go into more details on that. We have more slides if there's interest. But we think we've got a very solid estimate at this point. That's a map of the basin. The blue outline is the watershed. The purple area is City of San Diego. The yellow area is Lebanon. Green is Santa Fe. And then out on the left, sort of the light red, is the City of Del Mar. So those are the agencies that are selling water that is being used for irrigation. It includes both potable and recycled. So Lebanon can recover that portion of the recycled water that goes into the basin as well as the potable water. So again, without going into too much detail, the red box shows you the numbers that Geoscience came up with. We think they're solid. Totals up to about 2,300 acre feet a year, a little bit more, and that's enough to supply a plant of more than 1.5 million gallons a day. So very good result for us there. Okay, so next is economics. Joey's already talked about that and introduced it. Doug Gillingham is here. Doug did the work. Doug's with Gillingham Water. And so again, we get into those tough economic questions. Doug's here to help us out with those. So Joey mentioned this, but the project we're comparing it against buying San Diego County Water Authority water. That's a point of comparison. We're calling that the no project. Just continue to do what we're doing. Again, Joey mentioned the cost factors and non-cost factors that we evaluated. I'm going to talk a little bit about the non-cost factors because they're pretty important here. Same chart, it hasn't changed. It still looks really good on the non-cost factors. I'll go into those, but the project even looked better over a 30-year period than it did a year ago. So we did some refinement on that. We had another construction cost estimate done in 2022, so we updated numbers, and we feel pretty confident in that, and that gives us what we need to continue moving forward with this project. It still makes sense. And like I said, the non-cost factors, I think the important thing to look at here is this project reduces water taken from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And the state is very excited about that. They want to see any project that can do that. And then on the more regional level and western U.S. federal level, again, reducing demand on the Colorado River is a big thing. We have a reduced energy footprint with this, much less pumping than imported water sources, and reduced greenhouse gas. So both the cost and non-cost factors look very positive. We'll go into more detail on any technical questions you have, but for that, I'll let Joey wrap it up.
Thank you, Don. All right, so where do we go from here? So we report to a board of 5 directors that represent divisions. Those are Kim's 5 bosses. Improve our understanding of what those constraints and what those opportunities might be. So it's our job as staff to make that decision as easy as possible. This one's a tough one. Anytime you're talking about this kind of money, it's always a very measured approach. But that's what we're trying to do as staff is to sharpen that decision making. So we're going to conduct additional hydrogeologic analysis. There's just, you're kind of seeing the theme here. We can't know enough about that basin. And the best way to do that is to work with well owners, which we kind of glazed over a little bit, but we actually have a dozen different monitoring wells that we have permission from the well owner to monitor. We have piezometers. We're doing daily readings. We have groundwater reporting from the first years that we came down into the San Dieguito Basin. Reporting groundwater monitoring reports. So we know what's been going on with those levels in the wells. We know what's been going on with water quality changes. There's lots of data that informs these models, but we'd like to do some additional hydrogeologic, and that could include a couple of new pilot wells. So that wouldn't be a fully constructed well, but we need to find some partners that we can identify a location. Brian's kind of given us the idea where we think the sweet spot is. Identify some partners where we can continue to extract and pump those wells so we understand that, hey, that is a reliable supply. We're going to perform a risk analysis. So that's a process. Just again, get some outside thinkers, some folks that have been through this process before to help advise us. We know a lot of our known unknowns. What we want to know more about is our unknown unknowns because things come up, and these type of projects are challenging. We're always again trying to provide as much data to the board to inform this decision. We are planning on updating our economic model and also conducting a rate impact analysis. So what does this look like when we get all of these costs and we understand what these real costs are with inflation and everything going on today? What is that impact on the average OMWD ratepayer? And so still lots of work to do on that, but that's ultimately a question we have to answer and be able to provide to our board to understand this is what that impact looks like. We do want to do some alternatives analysis and preliminary design, so that's kind of I don't want to say a concept level engineering work, but pretty defined, but not all the way through to schematic drawings, kind of some high level engineering work, sort of kind of really pin that down a little bit better. We do want to host another board workshop so you can keep your eyes out. We'd like to inform the board we'll be developing our next two-year budget will be coming up in 2024. So the idea is we get ahead of that to let the board know what those anticipated costs are. And we'd like to do that in the spring because that's when that budget kind of comes together. It's effective July 1st for the fiscal year of 2024. And then we want to do some more community outreach. So just like what we're doing here today, hopefully get some good questions, meet some new people, and see how we can help manage the water supplies of not just this valley, but the entire 48 square miles of OMWD. This will help us as water managers. We can help each other. So what we're looking for from a timeline standpoint, if this were a go today, or if we had a full green light, which is not the case, but we're moving forward with these analysis to inform that final decision, we'll continue this hydrologic investigations as I just described, kind of this next fiscal year, the year after. We would then get into permitting, final design, regulatory approval. So remember that CEQA environmental impact report I was talking about? That's when that would get going in earnest. Potentially next calendar year would be the soonest. We'd get out to bidding and award a full set of schematic drawings. This is a massive project. Again, additional community involvement. Where does this need to be sited, et cetera, et cetera. That would be in the 2026, 2027 timeframe, and then we'd be into construction, which we think it'd actually take us about 2 years to build this, 2 fiscal years. So it'd span more than a 12-month construction period, as much as 24 months, but that would begin in, again, fiscal year 2028. So that's kind of the time frame. I have that kind of written out. Whoops. I don't. So there's my contact information. Yeah, all right, skip maybe. Skip one, okay. With that, that's our plan, that's our steps moving forward. We have a lot of experts here to answer questions, as Don mentioned, to help us out. So with that, again, thank you to our general manager, Kim Thorner, our board of directors for supporting the effort. This has been since 2007, we've been working on this. It's not something that we just wake up one day and have a wild hair and say, hey, let's look at this. This has been well over a decade in the making, and bringing us to this point of data gathering and information, and again, just to make those smartest informed decisions we can. So with that, thank you for your attendance. Do we have any questions out of here? Yeah. You might not need the mic, but we are recording.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation, Joy. My question is, it's a two-part question. Is the Lake Hodges Reservoir and the 3 wastewater plants from the community service districts, Fairbanks Ranch, Rancho Santa Fe, Whispering Palms, is their contribution to the groundwater significant? And is it material? For example, if the wastewater plants no longer discharge into the groundwater, if you lose that, is that material to this project? That's my question.
Great question. Excellent question, Mr. Hogan, and you can only imagine how much time we spent answering that question. So feel free, I know Kimberly's chomping at the bit in the back. She's kind of a great spot. Yes, Brian can help me out, but absolutely material question. By way of example, we had an interesting event during our 12-month pump test. So again, we've got these piezometers laid out. There's 16 different monitoring sites within this little area that we're monitoring within the basin. Well, when everything was set up and we had all of that fine-tuned equipment, and Brian and his team had that set up, we had a Hodges overflow. And so you get to see the marks, or how we trend the water levels. We trend that, and you're kind of looking at it, and man, that overflow event, and boom, the basin is full. So it's absolutely tight, and it's something that's very material because many of us know there's some work potentially happening with the Hodges Dam, and so we need to plan for less water from Lake Hodges, potentially. Every dam seeps, I can tell you that from experience. We have a water treatment plant right at the base of one, so there is an accounted for seepage around dams. So there'll be some sort of environmental discharge to any dam, but it may not be, to Mr. Hogan's point, it may not be to the volume that we've enjoyed, or this basin has enjoyed. So we've got a plan for losing that. There's opportunities for the CSDs to convert to tertiary treated recycled water. So maybe that secondary effluent discharge, that might go away. Or maybe they connect to the city of San Diego sewer. Very expensive, unlikely, but it's a possibility. It ends up in pipes and sent off to the metro treatment facility. So these are the types of questions that we have to contemplate. To answer your question, this 1 to 2 MGD treated water, so finished water plant, represents about 1% of that basin yield. And so what the experts tell us, and I can let Brian expound on this if I missed anything, it's a important impact to consider. It's not a deal breaker by any means if all of those supplies were to vanish or go away. Is that an adequate response, Brian?
I think it was good.
Okay, great question. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm just interested in some of the data from the test well you ran.
Yes, sir.
How many gallons a day were you pumping there? And what kind of drawdown did you have there? And what kind of drawdown did you record in neighboring wells? And did you test for salinity regularly up there in the neighboring wells?
Great question. I'm handing that to Brian Villalobos.
Probably know the answer.
I do,
to that.
but you know it better than me.
Right, so where the wells were put on the surf cut property were the location that was available a little bit on the edge of the basin, on the deepest part. So the well was pumping consistently at over 200 gallons a minute. Drawdown was about 30 feet. Salinity, I think, was at around 18 to 2,000 TDS at that time. So what we did is, Joey had showed all of the different monitoring wells that are up the basin, We had a series of wells that were put in many, many years ago that are in the shallow part of the basin. So from about here to here, there's a clay layer that's down about 60 feet. Above that's a shallow sand zone, below it's a deeper sand zone. So we had monitoring wells both screened below and screened above. We pumped this for a year, and the purpose of doing that was to apply a continuous stress and see how everything reacts. What we found is that the influence of the well was probably pretty much about here. That gave us more information on how that water moves through the aquifer. But what we found clearly was there was no response in the shallow. So the pumping zone is the deeper part of the aquifer, and when we pumped that, we didn't see any response in the shallow.
What is the deeper zone?
The deeper zone, again, is about 60 feet deep where we had the well, but in the area that the guys showed earlier, there are zones that are deeper, further in that. Part of the geophysics was to look at the configuration of the basin. We know there's a pretty deep spot right here. Test well wasn't put in the deeper spot, so we know that the basin can actually produce greater, has a greater capacity for wells to produce.
And until the overflow from Hodges mitigated everything.
Yeah,
What kind
that's-
of drawdown have you noticed in the nearby wells during the pumping season?
Right, so by doing the pumping test, we were able to get specific data for the aquifers there. Then what we did was we recalibrated the model to that data and then checked on what it would be if we pumped a full-scale project on different wells. And we've got maps and stuff and reports that show that. I think the greatest drawdown was like a foot in some of the wells that are pumping there today. So those are discussions that have to be happening.
Put in static level or in their drawdown?
No, it'd be the same. So foot in static as a result of the additional pumping, and then that affects your pumping.
Not one-to-one necessarily.
Well, if for instance, if a well is pumping and it's got a 20-foot deep, 20-foot pumping level, if you apply another well, the interference of that well would be about another foot. Okay, good.
We're recording. So what are the depths we're talking about in terms of the layers where you think the water is available? Is it 60 feet or 100 feet or 1,000 feet? Or you said some smaller, more surface levels around 60, and then there's something, I mean, where do you think the greatest opportunity to pump is?
So most.
What elevations?
Okay, great question. Should I answer?
Yeah, please.
So most of the coastal basins in San Diego County, all the drainages that go up, are all about the same depth. The maximum depth's about 200 feet, and that was tied to sea level changes, 17,000 years ago. So you've got about 200 feet thick of sand. Closer to the bay, and this is consistent up and down San Diego County. San Luis Rey, go further down to the Sweetwater River, all these different drainages. You have close to the coast, into about 3-4 miles, you have a clay layer that was at one point sea level kind of slowed down about 7,000-8,000 years ago and left the lagoons in these areas. But they only extended so far inland. So what you got in those areas is you've got a layer of sand below, then you've got that lagoonal deposits that are 10, 12 feet thick, something like that. Then you've got the recent sand deposits. As sea levels came up and the streams deposited, they left the shallow layer. It's consistent up and down San Diego County, and we see the same thing in San Diego.
So you've got two levels.
Two levels.
Split by a clay level or
That's
something.
that's exactly right.
And where is the greatest pumping opportunity? That's what I.
So for a project like this, we want to pump in the deeper level. And what we're finding is the deeper sands are actually a little more permeable than the upper sands. But not only do you want to pump from the deeper sands because of the capacity, it also doesn't affect the surface water. We don't want to impact surface water at all. And that's why it was important that we were seeing that when we pump in the deeper level, we see no response in the upper. That means that little creek can continue to flow and it won't be impacted by anything.
Can't get through the clay.
It can't get through the clay section. Yeah, I mean, there's a tiny little seepage because clay's not perfectly, permeable, but you can see in the water levels, it's just nothing's happening.
Is there a difference in the salt content between the deeper water and this more?
There's a little bit of difference, but really the difference is more up and downstream. As you go further upstream, you get more freshwater recharge, so it's better quality. And again, just like the other basins up and down San Diego County, back when ag was everywhere in those basins, they were doing a lot of pumping and inducing seawater intrusion. So that's to me, as a geologist, that's the beauty of a project like this, because the water was degraded years ago in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and now we have a chance to reuse it and make use of it. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there.
So one more thing. So if you're finding an optimum pumping areas, then you want to be upstream as far as possible because the salt level will be lower because of intrusion from the ocean.
Well, that's a question for
It's a good question.
the district, but it's a good question. Where that location is, do you want it too salty, or really you want it to use water that's not usable and then turn it into water that you can use? Like I said, the further you go upstream, the fresher it gets. And well owners up there are going to know that too, but you're going to want to be affected. So.
Hey, Julie, I'll come around.
So how, to produce the 1 million gallons a day that was the test well, how many did you have to pump to produce that 1 million gallons a day?
It's about 20% more roughly.
So it's not 2 to 1, but
And the rest is
20% more.
lost to brine.
Okay.
That water has to go out to the ocean.
And you may not have looked at this yet, but did that pumping have any impact on seawater intrusion to the ground basin, or do we expect it to with the 30 million gallons well project?
So the design of the project would be to avoid seawater intrusion. So the thing that we're going to do this year is finalize the groundwater model once and for all, add the data, get it recalibrated, get it as strong and as reliable as we can, and then we're going to test the project, test the various project scenarios.
Okay.
And so our intention is to avoid seawater intrusion, as well as impacts to local wells, as well as, all those factors that are important for the project.
Okay, and then that extra 20% that's not used would carry the brine to the JPA, and then you look at the concentrations of that discharge.
I'm sorry.
So the remaining 20% that's not used, that's not source water or potable water, would then go
No,
to
so
carry
the-
the effluent and the brine up to JPA?
Yeah, so you take this salty water, we call it brackish, because it's not as bad as seawater. Seawater is 33,000, we're talking 3, 4, 5,000. Take the salt out of that water to make it potable, and what we're left with is a brine.
Right.
Just roughly speaking, that's 20%. That is a long pipeline that goes up to the San Diego Ocean outfall. And so we actually put that into the ocean. And we went through quite a bit of coordination with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and that was their preferred option. So we're spending, the district would have to spend quite a bit of money to make that happen, as opposed to putting it in one of the local lagoons or putting it back in a salty groundwater basin or something like that. But the regional board, advised us that that was really the best thing to do for the project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Julie. Brian, do you have anything to add on the seawater intrusion?
Only that the current modeling shows the drawdown from the project doesn't induce. In other words, when you pump a well, it has an influence around it. So on the south end, it doesn't affect the sea, it doesn't pull one from the sea.
What's the estimated cost of this one MGD project?
Good question. You want to get on that one, Doug?
Yeah, sure. I think, Doug can help me out on this one, but the latest we've been looking at is 1.3 MGD. As the hydrogeology improves, or we go to 1.5 now. Yeah, okay, so 1.5. As the hydrogeology numbers come in and get more reliable, we've increased the size of the plant now to 1.5 MGD. And I believe the total construction cost is $47 million roughly.
54, including the additional planning and upfront costs.
Okay, so all the soft cost, design and environmental and everything, it comes out to a, $54 million project.
Just to follow up, what percentage of that cost is for the brine line?
Let's see, before design administration, it's about $12 million.
Okay.
It's about What's the length of that line? Is it about
That's,
about 7 miles of pipeline?
Mike, that's a factor that leads to some really strong economies of scale on the project, because you can make the project bigger and the brine line is 6 inches and it still is 6 inches. And so there's a pretty big benefit to looking for opportunities to make the project incrementally larger. We started at 1 MGD, went to 1.3, the hydrogeology now supports 1.5, and the economics look good at 1.5, but if you can make it 2 or larger, the economics get
I'm
stronger.
just thinking of the CSDs, if they ever go to recycle water.
Yes.
Connected to that line and have capacity would be a major boost.
Right.
Partnerships are key. And again, the incremental cost for an inch diameter on a pipeline is nothing compared to the impact of the traffic, the breaking ground, the pavement, all of that. So if we can find bring those partners in to beneficially use that brine line, that could be a huge economic advantage as well. Sir?
So I'm looking at your timeline, in the next 2 years, 2024, 2025, you'll be doing your hydrogeologic investigations. Now, will you be continuing your pulling data from those testing pumps, wells during that time?
Yes, that will continue. Yep.
And, okay.
We do that quarterly, and then we bunch them up into annual reports.
Okay.
And we're happy to share. We're all about data sharing. If that's something you're interested in, or if folks want to contribute, or if you know of a well that you'd like to have monitored, we might be interested in adding to our suite. Yes, sir.
Well, I appreciate all the economics, and that's key to eliminating doing this, and the hydrogeologic history, which is somewhat anecdotal too, and not actual factual. Being a user of the San Dieguito Basin, I would like to see build in some hard parameters of monitoring and response to changes in drawdowns, water levels, and salinity that they would do if something shows up in the future. Something firm and enforceable.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Noted. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Sorry about that.
Hey, we're all here, man. That's good. This is great.
So Carlsbad has the desalinization plant,
Yes, sir.
and they take seawater and pull the salt out of it and kick the salt out of the ocean. Same idea.
Yes.
So why does this differ in cost or scope from the Carlsbad desalinization plant? Because you're basically, instead of pulling it from the ocean, you're pulling it from the ground with the same problem, although not as dense to get rid of it. So is it this kind of project more feasible, cost feasible, because you're talking about a smaller salt level in the water, so it means it's less expensive to treat it as opposed to Carlsbad, which has ocean salinity? And that's really the difference, because you're taking either water mixed with salt in one degree or another and trying to treat it into usable water. Same idea.
It's the exact same idea. And there's people in this room that are way more qualified than me to speak to that on the desal question. Go ahead, Kim.
I was going to offer one of the big things is the power costs of the Carlsbad desal plant.
Yeah.
The power costs are putting it up, and maybe Mr. Hogan or Mr. Myers can help me. We're looking at $4,000 an acre foot water because of the energy intensity that comes from an open ocean desal project, whereas the power costs here are a lot less significant than desal. And I'm also going to offer, having been a partner on the Carlsbad desal project, the odds of this project making it through the environmental and regulatory process are probably a lot greater than another open ocean desal project, which is very hard to get through. the
Same
process.
technology, though. Same technology,
Reverse
with the
osmosis.
separation.
Yes.
Pretty much the same. We're contemplating some green sand filters in front. That's iron and manganese. You notice the irrigators and the folks that irrigate in the area. There's a nice little brown tint on things. So that's iron and manganese. That's in the groundwater. So from a potable water standard, we need to remove that. So that'd actually be another pre-filtration that would happen in front of our RO scans. So a little different than the seawater desalination. But it's the same concept, very much the same technology. Like Kim said, it's just scalable. Ocean seawater, it's about 33,000 parts per million TDS, total dissolved solid, which is salts, chlorides. The water that we're looking at is between 3,500 and 4,500 parts per million. It's a fraction. And I guess I would point out, these little brackish groundwater plants exist all up and down the state. Very prominent in Arizona, Utah. You know, there's whole towns that are built on groundwater basins and this kind of technology. A lot of groundwater basins have salts like this. And so it's a kind of a proven technology, whereas seawater desal, hey, there's how many of those in the world? You know, we could probably count here. So we've got another question in the back.
Thanks, Joey. Just relate that question. Can you guys just comment on the pressure that's needed to, the pressure that's through the salt and desal versus the pressure that's needed with this project?
Maybe you could tell us.
They're going to help us out with that. We got members from the audience that can help us out too.
He's going to answer the actual question. I'm going to give you the energy footprint. So Carlsbad desal energy footprint is about, including moving it up between those, is about 4,000 kilowatt hours per acre foot. State Water Project is about 3,000 kilowatt hours. Colorado River is about 2,000 kilowatt hours. This project would be about 1,600 kilowatt hours. So it actually scores points in the sort of climate action plan, greenhouse gas emission programs that the water agencies have. And then he's going to tell you, he's going to answer your actual question.
Sure, thanks. I was part of the design for the Carlsbad desal. So that operates anywhere between, say, 800 to 1,000 PSI on a bad day. And I would suspect you guys are probably in the 100 to 150 PSI range for your project.
Good question, Al. You stumped us. Any other questions while we've got everybody here? Okay, great. Well, this doesn't need to be our last communication. So we've got a website, OMWD.com, leavenhain.com. You click on groundwater, your water supplies, desalination. Talks about the studies that we did in the San Dieguito Basin. All kinds of information on the San Dieguito Groundwater Basin. We're always trying to make it more user-friendly and easily accessible. So if you have comments or ways that we can get that information more clearly disseminated, we appreciate it. But again, www.leavenhain.com/groundwater. You can navigate off of that page. Again, you probably saw an email from me. Has my email contact information on the invites, or Rob in the back. If you know of anybody, we'll add anybody that we don't have on our interest list or our stakeholder list. We will add you if you signed in the back, so make sure that you've done that. And hopefully we'll be back to folks talking about this project next spring, next summer, sometime once we get a chance to check in with the board, check in with our potential project partners, understand a little better direction of where we're headed. And thank you for coming out, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Yes, sir.
On your website, is there a place where the actual data from this test well is available?
Not the data.
Not the specific data, but the feasibility studies, there's actually quite a bit of data up there, but we are happy to share information.
There's a 2021 report by Geoscience that describes the pump test.
Oh, yeah.
That is on the website, I believe.
I was going to talk to you after about that.
Yeah, that report is on the website. I don't think we have our return flow calculation up on the website
Not yet.
at this point. Yeah, it's still a draft form.
And then the data we collect, every day is going to be, that data, the well network that we showed is going to be available through the county of San Diego. They're going to archive it for us from here on out, so anybody will have access to it.
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. We are going to post this up online as well.